I am pleased to broadcast this anniversary message from the people of Great Britain and the Dominion of Canada. Anniversaries are often days of reflection, to look back on the milestone events and on the quiet beats of every day gives new perspectives on the past and adds significance to the future. When you experience these moments with your partner in life, as I have with my Philip, they become particularly meaningful. It is therefore a pleasure to congratulate you on this occasion, your golden
Star Wars podcast
anniversary. Together you have braved new challenges, overcome adversity, discovered unimaginable joys, and transcended the definitions of
Star Wars podcasting.
You have taken this journey with your mutual affection and respect, building a life together alongside family and friends who all celebrate this landmark with you.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 50. I am your host, Robert Zachary, along with my co-host, John Llewellyn. Hello, John.
Howdy, howdy, howdy.
Howdy, we made it to 50 episodes.
I know, it's the 50 nifty Talking Bird, the special edition. Do-do-do-do-do-do. But, sorry.
That's right. We are there.
Sorry. Yeah.
I don't want to belabor this too long because it's like I was thinking about this the other night, and there's tons of podcasts that have gone way longer than 50 episodes, but I just wanted to take a second and thank people. I mean, technically, if we want to be like nitpickers, this is the 62nd episode of Talking Bird, but as the special edition, this is the 50th episode. Actually, technically, if I forget that I didn't number our Christmas special, it's technically the 51st episode, but in the format
of the special edition.
Yeah,
let's talking about Star Wars.
Now I've diminished it. First, people will probably like, "Hey, wow, that's interesting." Then I've diminished it to nothing.
That's all right. It's sort of like when TV shows do like, "Oh, it's our 100th episode."
Yeah, we should
100th episode. They sort of do something special, and then in some ways, right? It's not going to make any sense in syndication if they like do too much special. So they're like, "Yeah, it's still sort of just an episode of the show."
Yeah, I think I guess my point about all this is that, as much as I appreciate people sticking with us, there's a lot of people out there been going a lot longer. So it's bittersweet's not the word. It's like it puts it in perspective. I mean, I think when we finally do a true anniversary episode, the perfect one would be like, when it's just it's actually video, Raises from Black. It's just you and me on a stage with James Lipton.
In tuxedos.
And then we do our clip show, and then James Lipton will go, it's like, what would George Lucas be saying about tonight's event? And I'd be like, oh,
he'd tell us we were crazy.
This is it'd be like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, I do want to
guys, we're Star Wars fans. They love that they're fans, but you guys take this too seriously. You know this is just a movie, right?
Yeah, it's just a movie. I was actually Googling George Lucas last night because I'm actually kind of, like I said, I've said this on other episodes, worried about the guy. His museum.
Oh, really?
He sold off all of his creations. He's still a relatively not a young man, but he's still around. He's still healthy, and he's got nothing to do. Although I've heard rumor that he's going to be involved with Indy 4 on some level, but who knows? But I was like, his museum in Chicago,
didn't
happen, and I can't say I'm upset about that because I mean, my opportunities to go to Chicago are few and far between. But my opportunities to go to Southern California, which I'm kind of hoping it'll eventually end up, You know,
Mhm.
I'm at least in California at least once a year, so
Yeah.
I'm like hoping that I would have a chance to go to a Lucas museum.
Yeah. Well, and two, I mean, I don't want to inject politics into this too much, but I think some of the concerns that people in Chicago raised about the location of the museum, were probably valid. And sure, it's a museum, it'll create jobs, it'll bring tourism, but that's not the only consideration that cities need to have. And so,
Yeah,
it would have been nice if it worked out in San Francisco. It would have been nice if it worked out in Chicago, but I'm also personally like, does George Lucas need his own museum?
Well, I mean,
we have plenty of other museums that cover a wide range of topics into which Lucas's collection could fit. If he gets his own museum, great. But if he doesn't, I don't have enough of a personal investment in his getting his own museum that I'm gonna be that annoyed at cities who are like, yeah, we'd rather not, but thanks for asking.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of passion in fandom about getting that in Chicago, at least with some people. Which I'm not gonna cast aspersions on people about their love of Star Wars and how public they want to make that. I mean, that's. Right. At the end of the day, it's all positivity, but I understand what you're saying. It's like I haven't really looked into what the people that were against it, what their point was, but they obviously had enough of a valid of a point that it kind of put the kibosh on it.
Yeah, and again, to be fair to some of those folks too, no one has suggested putting that museum in the city in which I live, and so if they did, maybe my thinking would be slightly different.
I will say that
I don't know that it would, but there's that element of it too.
I will say this as a representative of the city of Seattle, Washington, George Lucas is more than welcome to open his museum anywhere he wants, as long as it doesn't mean tearing my house down.
Yeah,
because it's like, but we have a lot of museums that I'd never go to here, so it would just join another litany of our beautiful Boeing Museum of Flight, which anybody who visits and enjoys the history of airplanes is actually pretty massive. It's like one of those things that every time I drive past it, I think to myself, this thing is huge, but I haven't been there in years.
Yeah.
But we have, I don't think there's any personal connection of Seattle to Lucasfilm. I mean, actually, I guess the big one that they're trying to get people to, they're trying to make it appealing to Lucasfilm or whoever is Sacramento, which I mean, it's north of the Bay Area. That's about the only thing about it that would be a connection. So, I mean, so I guess, hey, if you're a millionaire, a multimillionaire with some clout around here, you want to build a George Lucas museum, go for it. So do you chase the Pokemon?
No, actually, I would never did Pokemon really. Is it Pokemon or Pokemon? Pokemon.
I always thought it was Pokemon.
Pokemon,
or as we call it,
the Pokemon.
Chimpokemon from the South Park.
Right.
Yeah. No, I mean,
no, I never really did it when it came around the first time, or I might have been slightly too old when it first blew onto this American scene. I think I might have been slightly too old, and now it's like I don't really use my phone that much. Apps or not, I don't have a ton of apps, and then there's all this stuff that's come out about like it uses all of your Google account information. Like I could just tell, like when I first saw it and I first heard what it does, I was like, oh, I bet that just like takes all of your data and takes all of your information, and it's a way for them to like, I don't know. I have maybe not paranoia, but like I very sensitive about like data privacy with your cell phones.
Oh, and rightly so. I mean, it's well, boy, I could go off on that, and I won't. But yeah, I know it's the Pokemon thing. It's like I'm way too old to have ever understood it. I'm almost a little jealous, just because like how involved. It's almost, it's almost like the way people get about Star Wars, except as far as I can tell, Pokemon doesn't really have a huge mythology to it. It all seems to be kind of like, I don't know. It's one of those things that kind of free floating, and I've seen, and it's hit big. I mean, it's hit big in Seattle. It's very common to see people just wandering about with their phones and stuff like that, and you're just like, wow. I mean, I never got into geocaching, which is probably a much more complex exercise, and it could probably take you further out of the realms of your area. But
yeah,
I mean, whatever. It's good. It's anything to kind of give some people something to do this summer with all the stuff going on in the world. I guess it's just funny. It's amazing how you get to a point where you can be like around Christmas, you're like totally in the zeitgeist of like, oh, Star Wars is so exciting, and you're thinking like, this is great. There's something going on that I actually know about.
Right.
To 6 months later being like, I have no idea what a Pokemon is. But I mean, that's pop culture for you. It's kind of, I think around Christmas, we'll be back to, I'll be feeling like, people in my family at Christmas parties would be like, what's going on with this Star Wars movie? You're the guy. So I guess I simultaneously kind of chuckle at Pokemon, and then I respect it because I think I know what it's like to be nerdy about something that nobody cares about generally.
No, I know, but I guess it's I don't want to get into not an ageism thing, but like, when I see 30-year-olds or whatever go like, oh, I gotta go to this park to see their Pokemon there. Like, yeah, like, okay, it's like a fun thing to do if you don't have anything else to do, but I feel like it's just I feel like it's just a time suck that it's like, wow, how do you have that much free time?
I mean, like, I know you're
like after a certain age, I'm like, how do you have the time for this?
Yeah, well, especially these people don't have children. I mean, that's the first.
Well, yeah, that's the part of it.
Unless the kids are old enough to want to go do this with them. I mean, I don't think that's unfair. I mean, I think even with our show, it's like, you can have an honest conversation about like, well, you guys are grown adults and you're talking about a kids movie.
Right.
So it's kind of like,
where do we find the time?
Well, where do we find the time? And I'm not saying like, oh, like I'll take that. That's actually a fair cop. It's like I will, and we could discuss it for hours on another show or whatever. But yeah, I totally understand where it's a thing that even with like things that I enjoy. It's like, I don't have kids, so I have a lot more free time than someone with the kids. Like, okay, but what do I do with my free time? I do a lot of things that if I was looking at it with a pretty shrewd eye, I would say, yeah, these are some kid stuff. Why are you doing kid stuff? Like, why are you playing, Red Dead Redemption for 2 hours a night right now? Video games are for kids.
Well, but I mean, we've talked about that stuff a little bit too, right? And I think some of it's for kids, but it's a way to relax. It's a way to kind of unwind, turn your brain off. So I'm not saying that like adults shouldn't be playing the new Pokemon game. I'm just saying like, hey, wow, I do not know that I would, I don't have kids either, but if I just took away doing this show, like I don't think I would have the time to just like wander around everywhere doing these things. And then also like, yeah, it's like, this isn't just like they put this out because they thought it would be a fun game for people. Like, they structured it and built it in a certain way that like you're just sending them all of your data and like account information at all times, and it's a way to like track people.
Yeah, it's
like,
for the it's
like at a certain level, like
big data.
I care about that enough that it's not for me. It's not for me. Is where I.
Right. And the parallels have already come out. I mean, I saw on Twitter, I can't remember the name of the episode, but and you may have not of Star Trek: The Next Generation, where there's a famous thing where these guys you wear these glasses and you use your brain to throw discs into this kind of vortex, and every time you're able to get the disc in there, it releases some kind of endorphin in the person's brain that gets them high. And really, at the end of the day, it's some alien race is actually using it so they could steal the Enterprise. It's kind of like, I mean, not to be conspiratorial about it, but because I totally understand your thoughts about like this idea where it's like, yeah, they're literally, if you have a Google account and they've supposedly patched it. They're dipping in there and looking, are they looking at your emails? Are they looking at your address books? Are they looking at some half-completed short story that you wrote that you're never going to finish? And regardless of whether or not you think that, well, that's just that's your data.
Yeah.
And it's kind of,
well, and there, and even, not even just Google account, but there's been lots of stuff, different apps or different websites or whatever that I've gone to that ask like, oh, you can log in with your Facebook account. And sometimes I do it and sometimes I don't. And I'm always like, I don't know why they need this information. What is this going to do to my Facebook account? What is this going to do to like the information I have on there? And I'm sure it's just a way to like get the contact information of people so they can, send them spam emails or whatever. But yeah, and even I think there was probably, I've looked into like maybe Star Wars apps or games or whatever and been like, yeah, I don't know how much this is just like you want my contact information and like all of my friends' email addresses,
Yeah.
So
it's like one of those things where you kind of have to just weigh the benefit, and it's kind of like, I don't think you and I see much of a benefit in these kind of things, and I think
not me personally, but others do, or they don't care about it as much, and that's fine for them.
Yeah, and that's not a reflection on anybody, but anyway, let's get into Star
Wars.
So we are at the precipice, which is a weird time to do an episode.
It is. This is a weird. The fact that we do them on Wednesdays too, we're in a weird position here.
But something, I'm perfectly all right with it because next week we're gonna have even more stuff to talk about, and I feel we have stuff to talk about too.
Right. We're finishing up clearing off the decks from all the stuff we missed while we were gone for a couple weeks.
Yeah, and we are 2 days away. It's the 13th, so 15th is it's 36 hours away, maybe. Or not 30. I don't know. I'm not going to do math.
It's a day and a half minus the time difference from wherever in the United States you might live, if that's where you live, between there and London.
Yes, I'm being very Pacific centrist in my ideas. Anyway, we are so close to Star Wars Celebration Europe 2016, and this is the funny thing. So I'm like looking around, kind of like looking at some of our fellow Star Wars compatriot podcasters that I interact with on Twitter occasionally, and I see. First, I was like, well, there's no way in hell we're going to be able to go. So it kind of went off my mental radar. But now, now that we're just a couple days away, I'm like so jealous. I'm so jealous to be like, because it's like a combination. My favorite thing, Star Wars, and I love London. I've been there twice myself as a tourist, and it's like now I'm kind of like jealous. I'm like, oh man, and they're gonna probably see that Rogue One trailer first before us all.
Yeah, that trailer is that's before Celebration, so that must be like tomorrow, I think.
Oh boy,
I don't know. I'm seeing something that suggested maybe even today.
Oh boy.
But so Rogue One trailer. Last week we talked all about the recent Rogue One series of articles coming out of Entertainment Weekly and Images and so okay, I guess it's Friday the 15th. So so it'll air Friday, I guess, but not during Celebration. They're not releasing it as part of Celebration, but
they're gonna have to. Those people, they come all across the Europe and even the US, they're gonna throw them a bone, but they're just not they're not advertising it, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry for being so emphatic, but I'm just kind of like, I would feel like, gosh, you flew over there or you spent all this money, you got to let those guys see it first.
Well, I mean, I wonder if they're going to get, there's that creators panel, future storytellers panel at the end where they have Chris Miller and Phil Lord, and they have Rian Johnson, I think. So I wonder if they're going to get some like, here's a teaser for episode 8, sort of like what they did with Rogue One a year ago, where it was just like 30 seconds. It was just a shot of, a background essentially. But I wonder if they're going to get stuff like that.
I wonder if they're, I've heard rumor, and this is obviously just rumors, that they're going to that maybe Ryan's going to drop a title on them.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised because it's getting, right. They're wrapping up filming
today.
Next week.
They filmed it up. Well,
okay.
Mark Hamill and Daisy Ridley are officially done as of today, I think.
Principal photography.
There was a party and everything. There was.
Okay.
Did you see the dancing stormtroopers?
I did not.
So for people who haven't hunted it down, Mark Hamill. Why am I? Yeah, like I hang out with Mark Hamill. Mark, my old friend Mark. I guess he Mark. Hey Mark. What are you doing?
Is Mark Hamill.
Mark Hamill and
how's it going?
Gonna travel, gonna go up. I made my own pasta sauce. Mark Hamill's pasta sauce. I thought I'd give it a try. I'm sorry, listeners.
That's an in joke, not a bug out.
You gotta look up. You gotta look up.
Listen to what Marky Ramone sounds like, and then listen to
Sharpling
Marky
and Worcester.
Ramone. Yeah,
Sharpling and Worcester for hours. They do Marky Ramone, and then go find this commercial for Marky Ramone's pasta sauce. I'm like, I like to eat, so I said, why not? I'm sorry. That is such a divergent topic. I'm sorry. Sorry. Now I know why we're not even in the top 50 of Star Wars podcasts. Yeah. They're like, review. Not a lot of Star Wars on the Star Wars podcast.
Yeah. But they're gonna get some, I think, surprises. Well, even I guess the Star Wars show, which is the relatively new YouTube show, which airs Wednesdays. Apparently, I guess today's episode has Dave Filoni and a sneak peek at season 3 of Rebels. So I would imagine that they might get more from Rebels season 3 while they're in London.
I need to get caught up on that show. I've sadly kind of forgotten to. If it's not a podcast, it doesn't. It doesn't occur to me. It's like video, and I think Is it just? Have you watched it?
Which have I watched?
The
Rebels
show,
and
the Star Wars show.
No, not really. Yeah. Like if I don't actively seek it out. If it pops up on my feed while I'm on Twitter, when I happen to be on Twitter, then maybe I'll click. It'll kind of depend on what they're promoting that week. And there are a couple episodes where they had Dennis Muren, so I always think he's really interesting talking about that stuff. Yeah. It turned out to be a lot of stuff he said before, but so it'll depend on kind of what they're talking about. This thing I took a really quick gander. I didn't watch the whole episode of the Star Wars show. I just watched the Rebels bit.
I see.
And it was Rebels. Ezra looks different now, but other than that, it was a Rebels episode.
I didn't look at that.
He's older now. He's taller. He has a new haircut, and he has a new lightsaber.
Are they jumping ahead?
I guess, or it could be. I don't know how far they're jumping ahead. It could just be that when you're a certain age, when you're a teenagers get growth spurts. So that's
gonna get that. He's got like a whole season in that awkward stage when all of a sudden you get like peach fuzz on your cheeks and like this weird.
I guess
weird. Huge,
I don't know.
And you're sounding like this all the time.
Maybe he'll try to grow a goatee or get a soul patch like Kanan. Maybe he'll go through that phase.
I dropped my saber. I'm gonna have to talk to my Jedi Master about that.
He's not going to be very happy with me. But so Ezra has a green lightsaber now. We'll spoil it for everyone who hasn't seen it already,
including me, because obviously I've been off my game.
It's not like a big reveal in the little clip, but
I guess I'll get caught up on it. I'm being a bad Star Wars podcast host, and I better get caught up on that because there's going to be there's a test. There is a quiz. There will be a test, and there's going to be a huge amount of video coming out of London.
Yeah, there is.
And of course, it's going to be delayed by 8 hours, I assume, unless it's going to be running live. But
I don't know. I think the Star Wars show folks, they're going to be hosting a lot of the live stream that's happening, and that looks like it's, from 10 a.m. Eastern time to something else. So I don't know, or maybe not. Maybe it's 10 a.m. local time. I'm not sure how they're doing that.
Yes.
How they're managing that.
I guess in this time, it doesn't really matter with time shifting now, but it's
Yeah.
Between this and like PBS's 4th of July fireworks were a different year, and NBC's not showing the Olympic opening ceremonies, that like they're going to be delayed by 8 hours. It's this all this time shifting is very confusing for an old brain.
Yeah.
But somehow I'll muddle through.
Yeah. But speaking of characters, since we were just talking about Hasbro, one of the things that's happened recently is, Hasbro has these Black Series figures, which are like regular Hasbro figures, except they actually put effort into them or something. I'm not really sure what the difference is. Just there's, I guess, slightly better materials and they're more expensive.
Yeah. I mean, they're twice the height, twice the price.
Yeah. So they're doing something again that they did at least last year, and I don't know previous years, where they're having fan votes for the next either 1 or 2 Black Series figures. And I say 1 or 2 because last year Darth Revan was the lead vote getter, who is of course from the EU now, from video games, and I guess he might have gotten a book, I can't remember. So they also made a figure out of the number 2 vote getter, who was Sabine from Rebels. So you vote for this thing. I guess there are a bunch of different blogs that are participating, Star Wars blogs that are participating. We are not, because again, we're not that well known, I guess, in the... Right, no, it's because we're the punkest Star Wars podcast, and we're not going to sell out and promote commerce on our website, except for our Amazon link. If you
Talking Birdcast / Amazon, the day after Prime Day when people were actually shopping on Amazon.
Yeah, but I will say, so a brief aside. So Aftermath: Life Debt came out yesterday. If you have not purchased your copy of Star Wars Aftermath, if you're going to purchase a copy, we're not necessarily going to tell you to buy one if you weren't going to buy one, but if you wanted to purchase one and have not yet, you can use the Amazon link on our website, and it'll kick back a little something to us. It won't add any cost to your purchase. Neither one of us has read Life Debt yet. I will be getting it soon, probably, and then reading it. So either next week or the week after, I'll have a review. So anyway, so these Hasbro characters, there are a ton of them already.
Yes.
But what's interesting is there are a few really obvious characters that apparently don't have these figures yet. So like, there's no Lando Black Series character. There's no, either the Bespin Lando or the Jabba's Palace Lando. They have an Emperor Palpatine, but they don't have a Chancellor Palpatine. They have a young Obi-Wan. They have a Ewan McGregor Obi-Wan, but they don't have an Alec Guinness Obi-Wan. There's no Qui-Gon. There's no Admiral Akbar. They have some characters from the Clone Wars, but they don't have like Ahsoka or Asajj Ventress, who you might think were very popular characters from that show. They don't have any Ewoks, who you may think, well, why would that have Ewoks? It's because they put out figures for these Ewoks, years and years ago.
Right.
They don't have Count Dooku. They don't have General Grievous. They have a lot of characters from Rebels, but they don't have the Grand Inquisitor. Or Hera. I don't think they have Hera from Rebels either. A lot of the Jedi who became popular either in the movies, the prequel movies, or in the Clone Wars, like Kit Fisto or Plo Koon, do not have their own figures. But you are in luck if you want Clone Wars related figures. You can get a clone trooper, a clone trooper captain, a clone trooper sergeant, a clone pilot, and then specific clone captains and sergeants and commanders like Cody and Thorn and Rex. So it's like a weird mix of people who they have and don't have. And so we were trying to think of like, okay, so who would, if we were to vote in this, like who would we vote for? But then as I was thinking about that question, I was also thinking about, given this weird mix of like who they have and don't have, I'm not even sure who the target audience for these Black Series figures is.
That's a good question.
I mean, I guess it's probably like collectors, really. It's like the people who are going to spend twice as much money on one of these figures just to get like the better, slightly better detail
Right.
on the painting is higher quality on the costume or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, when you get to
or like I guess parents who don't know any better, and I know my kid likes Star Wars, I'll get them this. Can you believe that they're this expensive these days? So it's, I guess, a two-part question for you then, Robert.
Okay.
What figures do you think would you vote for if you were voting? And then I guess what criteria are you using to select those figures? Is it who you personally like to see, and like who would be buying these things?
Well, so that's a good question. And then since I'm standing kind of tilting my head and looking at my meager Star Wars collection, which does include 2 Black Series figures.
Right. Because of the two of us, you are by far the larger collector of these things. Maybe not even a real
either
collector. Both intentionally as a collector, but then also like you've bought a lot of these figures.
I did move my B-Wing. I brought my B-Wing back from my mom's house, so now I have my B-Wing in my office. So I've gone full nerd. Well, so here's the thing. I made this list of 4, and then I thought about like the limitations of this price point, because you can get like when you get in those Japanese toys, like the amount of the sculpts and stuff are just incredibly photorealistic. It's like amazing. Like, and I think most of them are done by hand. They're not like 3D printed heads or whatever. They're sculpting. Anyway, I would say for the Black Series, a lot of times articulating a human face can be problematic.
Yeah,
just it's so easy of a degree off of the bridge of the nose and or the way the lip is done.
And I'll say too, I've read some reviews of these things, and particularly the Rey figures, like I don't think they look anything like Daisy Ridley at all.
Yeah,
like they're not very flattering to Daisy Ridley, but I keep seeing these reviews of like, oh, the sculpt is great, and like, oh, it's such a realist. I'm like, really?
Yeah, it's really they not on any level. They've not gotten very close to kind of getting some of the subtleties of her face. And maybe it's because it's like she's done one movie with, they've got one movie, a Star Wars movie with her, and sometimes I maybe they would go back to an actor's other work to get angles that didn't happen in the movies, but since she's only really done television, she was quite different looking in them, I don't know if that was much help. But I guess my votes would be, well, one, now that I know that they haven't done like a Bespin Lando, I'm a little disappointed. So I would have to say like a really good Bespin Lando in the blue shirt with cape would be my first and foremost. Second only to an old Luke from obviously the end of The Force Awakens. Another Lando, which I thought of when I assumed they'd already done a Lando, which was Lando in Han's clothes at the end of at the end of Empire, because it's like that can be he's wearing wearing the whole get up. I think he went in and got Han's second change of clothes at the end of the movie, which is not repeated in any other scene. And I had 2 other. I had a was it Guardian or whatever? I always call him the Mos Eisley spy. He's the guy with the Garinden. Even though it's like I was at a store the other day buying a comic book, and they had like a 12-inch one from the 90s of him, but it was like, geez, I couldn't buy it. It was only $20, so it'd be exactly the same price as if I had walked in 6 months later and bought a Black Series. But the articulation is just like, it was. If you look up closely at the costume, it looks really bad anyway.
Yeah.
So it blown up to a 12-inch figure. So I'm gonna have to say that I will have the caveat that unless the sculpt looks really weird, I would say that. But then the last one, because he's kind of become a character that was a man of mystery until recently, Bo Shek.
Oh yeah,
get a Boshek, and I think Boshek for the sculpt, the hardest part is to get those sideburns right, slicked back hair, that space jockey outfit or whatever he's wearing.
Yeah,
I think you could do a pretty good 6-inch Boshek.
Yeah,
I mean that's the thing. I think a lot of these kind of fall within because they've only made one ship for the 6-inch, which is a first order TIE fighter. Which is, if you go on YouTube and like look up Black Series first order TIE fighter, the thing is enormous. I can't imagine anyone who doesn't have like an entire Star Wars room how they could even justify buying this thing, because the guy took it out of the box and it is so big.
Yeah,
because to get the scale right, it's like, yeah. But anyway, that would be I guess my point is that they're picking things that I think it's almost things that people just kind of want to see. I don't, like you said, I have some, I'm confused as what the rhyme or reason of how they pick one over the other in some of these choices, but I guess my choices are just as capricious as theirs are.
Well, and it's you're talking about Boschek, and some of the fan voting I've seen for these things were like, we want Jason and Jaina Solo, and it's, on the one hand,
let it go. No,
right. On the one hand, I'm like, yeah, you need to let that go. But then on the other hand, it's like, yeah, but so some of the characters I might want, like, every individual creature from the Cantina scene. It's like, yeah, maybe I need to let those go too, right? Like, what makes? Yeah. Oh, I want what is it? A Chandrafan drinking the blue milk in the Cantina. Like, what makes that any more viable of a figure than like Jason Solo or whatever? It's So I'll at least concede that maybe some of the choices I might make are themselves like, yeah, there's probably a very limited audience for those as well. I mean, the thing I'm when I was trying to come up with my list, I was struggling too. Is a lot of the ones that I thought were obvious and that we've talked about, like Lando, like, well, how can they not have a Lando? It's like, okay, but there are like at least four other Bespin Lando action figures already, like, yeah, they're not the new Black Series, but they've gone through, Kenner and Hasbro have both put out numerous Lando figures. And it's like, do we need another Lando figure? Or is there like something that is not already out there? And that's kind of what I was thinking. And I don't know that I made up my mind one way or the other. But, certainly I think, given that, I don't know if it started with Force Awakens, but, certainly the Force Awakens was a big part of this push for this Black Series. The fact that they don't have Leia from Force Awakens, I think that's a good way to go, especially because her costumes in that movie were kind of neat, and she had that jacket or whatever it was with the starburst on the collar. Like, that could be, there could be cool to have a figure of that. I guess Snap Wexley maybe, because he has some lines. Greg Grunberg can get his own figure, and fine, great. The fact that there's no Qui-Gon figure, I think, is weird, considering it was a big part of that first movie. And if they're gonna put out a Darth Revan figure, then maybe start taking characters from this new canon that they're developing, and maybe someone like Ray Sloan, who has appeared in numerous novels and short stories and in other properties, and is clearly playing a pretty big role in the new story that they're telling of the time period between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens. Maybe something from the comics, Dr. Aphra, they clearly invested a little bit of time and energy into developing that character. So that could be, a neat figure. Again, like Count Dooku and General Grievous seem obvious to me, and not in the sense that like, well, there are already a lot of figures of these people. But those are some that, General Grievous might be hard, but that could be a really cool, very nicely sculpted figure, I guess. So those were some of my first blush. And then I was really thinking about it, and I was like, who needs a Black Series figure? Dexter Jetster. Or what about the Greg Proops announcer character from Phantom Menace? Like, let's really
just his half.
Right, no, well, no, because I don't know who did the other voice, but the two-headed announcer from the Phantom Menace, like, let's really push the boundaries of what figures we're putting out there, right? Like, what about Zero the Hutt, that flamboyant, kind of
The Quentin
goofball
Crisp
guy?
of Huts or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. You could do Callista from the if we're gonna put EU characters, old EU characters, we could put Callista.
Oh yeah,
You could-
let's have
you could even have multiple versions of Callista.
Admiral Dala.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. You could do
Galad
a
Pelion.
you could do a 2-pack of Wilford Brimley and B. Arthur.
No, it wasn't Wilford Brimley. It was Art Carney.
No, wasn't Wilford Brimley in in that Ewok adventure movie?
Oh, oh, geez. Now you're making me. Now you're making me look
Or,
it up.
I can't remember if it was the movie or like the TV show they did.
No, I know there was an old coot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Ewoks: The Battle for Endor has Wilford Brimley as Hermit Noah.
I'm not gonna do any of that stuff.
Yeah. So yeah, I think a B. Arthur Wilford Brimley 2-pack would really. I think there are some fans who would go for that. I'd probably buy one of those and wouldn't take them out of the package.
I would definitely do a B. Arthur. I would buy a
I would
B.
display
Arthur
those
Black
proudly
Series.
on my shelf.
I have one of my favorite artifacts of youth, as I call them, is that my copy of Starlog magazine from 1979 or 78, which is a front cover of B. Arthur on the front of Starlog, them pimping this soon to be happening Star Wars holiday special.
Mm-hmm.
And she's very she's got this like long Princess Leia type. She doesn't have the buns or anything, but I think she has like a long ponytail. It's really great. So yeah, I would definitely be up for like a B. Arthur or a I don't even remember her character's name, or even like the Wookiee family. Gosh, think about a
Yeah, it was Itchy. Was the other one, just the most horrible looking.
a Mullabook and a scratchy 3-pack.
Yeah.
You know, it's like the Banned from Canon series. They could have a Grand Admiral Thrawn. They could have honestly, I think that would be a nice. I think that'd be an olive branch to some people that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I
Fine.
don't
You want us to bring back the EU? Here is your B. Arthur figure.
I don't mean to be a dick about it. I'm just saying you got to take the good, the bad with the good. But because it's like I don't want to go off into a whole conversation about the old canon stuff because I understand people's passion for it, but I think we also have to, as people who enjoy creative stuff, we have to realize that sometimes these things end. But it's also not a nice way of saying, hey, no hard feelings. We know you love this stuff. So here's some like great EU stuff. But the one thing that I'm like, I just occurred to me when we were talking that we completely overlooked was, especially from how the intricacy of the conversation last week, is why would we not be thinking of some Rogue One stuff? All those great characters.
No, I should have stipulated. So the Rogue One characters were explicitly excluded from this contest. So that's the thing. But yeah, so which means I assume that we will be getting Rogue One.
Yeah, I mean, just think of all this great costuming and stuff.
Yeah.
That, that Baze Malbus. I mean, all of his flamethrowers and crap. I'm gonna, and his braids and that, I'm gonna
Donnie Yen's character.
Yeah, when those stuff come out, I'm probably gonna be picking up a Baze Malbus. Maybe, maybe like one of those black troopers, one of those death troopers for the, because like I said, I'm trying to keep it. But then I was
going to say, there's already a Finn Stormtrooper Black Series, if that's what you meant. Never mind. It was a joke. Never mind. It was a joke.
I got him right here. Trust me. He's on the desk. He's right on there.
No, no. I think the Rogue One. Yeah, they could look, but again, like it all depends on how well they get the head and face correct,
Oh yeah, I know.
And what they did with Rey doesn't really inspire a lot of confidence in me for what they're going to do with Jyn.
And to be perfectly honest, it's like the first sculpt of the Poe Dameron coat wearing Finn. I mean, it's like I feel bad.
He looks a little husky, doesn't he?
I feel bad for John Boyega having to take that figure and go, "Oh, thanks." Because he's like, yeah, you made me look. You know, I'm a good-looking dude, right? Know, I'm like, you've seen me work out in the gym and stuff, and guy probably eats nothing but like chicken breast and brown rice
Yeah.
until these
You've
movies.
waited your whole life for a Star Wars action figure after your character,
And he looks like he's
this is what it looks like.
He looks like he's trying to push a dump out in that first sculpt. And I was like, and people like,
He's a little pear shaped.
yeah, and it's like his Stormtrooper one is actually really good. I was pleased when I got it that it's got a removable helmet and stuff, and it's like, yeah, it's a much better. I mean, for the $20 price point, but I've seen some of the 3-inch 3.75 figures with a better facial sculpt than that first Finn they did, which, was probably rushed. They were probably we got to get these out and manufactured and hermetically sealed so they don't leak and all that. I mean, I don't know what it's like to make a toy or what the time frame is, but it was a really, really bad. I mean, they, between that and all those Constable Zuvios that are floating around now, which you can basically, I mean, that was, I think anybody who's a fan knows about this thing with Constable Zuvio not really even being a real character, and I don't even think there was a deleted scene. I think
basically he got edited out of the movie, except for like maybe his shoulder is in one scene.
Exactly.
And
even then, it was like
they devoted so much space prior to in the run up to The Force Awakens. Like Constable Zuvio popped up everywhere. You can actually find, if you don't mind getting a 3.7-inch figure, Desert Mission Constable Zuvio, if you don't want the Black Series, because there is a Black Series Constable Zuvio.
Yes.
But if you don't care about that, you can get one for $2.75 on Amazon right now.
Oh man!
Please use our Amazon link.
And he's not even
TalkingBirdcast.com. I actually might get one just because I think it's like a fun artifact. Like I like the idea hits me now. Like, oh, that would be kind of funny to have like this character and have people ask who it is and be like, well, he's sort of in Star Wars. He's not really in Star Wars, but he's in all of the Star Wars promotional material.
Yeah. It's kind of like that. My feeling of wanting. I was in a Half Price Books, and they had this really obnoxious Jar Jar Binks statue for $20, and it was like, it's big, and I'm thinking, man, that would be such a conversation. Be like, oh my god, he has a Jar Jar Binks statue.
Yeah.
But I was feeling very cheap that day, and then when I came back feeling a bit more flush with cash, it was already gone.
Yeah.
But it was kind of like. Yeah, I understand. It's like, it's too bad that it wasn't like something like the who's the Guavian?
The Guavian Enforcer.
Yeah, because it's like, then you could have 10 of them, and it would be like they all look the same, or like stormtroopers or whatever. But yeah, you're stuck with
But I do love the first bullet point here on Amazon on their list, on their thing for this. It's recreate adventures and scenes from the Star Wars universe. Like, well, then why are you buying Constable Zuvio, who is in zero adventures and scenes?
I'm putting in context, you guys. You always complain that kids don't play creatively enough. I'm putting in context.
Yeah. So, yeah. So like we said, if you really want to vote for this thing, you can track down any number of, Google it. I'm sure one of the blogs that is participating will show up, and you can vote that way. But yeah, it's a weird. Like I said when I was thinking about it, there are these weird questions of like, so who are these things for? And then, like, yes, I take the point that like these Black Series, figures, like they really try on these, for lack of a better word, and they have attention to detail and everything. But do we need like 8 Lando Bespin figures in the world, or
yes, we do,
or maybe is it time to like, all right, let's focus on the new movies and maybe a Leia from The Force Awakens because she's kind of an important character, or something like that.
Or they could just, or they'll just do something really simple, like they'll reissue the figure and then put a mask on it and say, inside Space Slug Leia.
Right.
With like an irremovable mask.
Yeah.
You're like, I can't take this mask off. Well, then you can't complain about her sculpt.
Right.
You unpleasable jerks. Like, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, what do we talk about next?
So, well, if I had been smart about this, I would have organized this better. But we already mentioned the Rebels Season 3 got a kind of teaser on the Star Wars show. There's been some suggestions that season 3 of Rebels will tie into one of the upcoming movies or multiple upcoming movies in some way. Rogue One, I think, is kind of the most obvious guess, and so that's a lot of speculation, in part because you have, as we talked about last week, the Clone Wars connection with Forrest Whitaker's character Saw Gerrera now, and Dave Filoni is has brought several Clone Wars characters into The Force Awakens, and so it's possible that the Ghost Crew could potentially encounter Saw Gerrera in his guerrilla tactics somewhere. The other connection is that Gary Whitta, who worked on the story and the screenplay for Rogue One, will be writing an episode of Rebels in season 3. So that's another connection. But I think it's also possible, we've kind of avoided episode 8 spoilers a little bit in terms of the story, at least on this show, but there's a suggestion out there that in episode 8 we may learn more about the origin of the Jedi, or where the Force originated in some sense in episode 8, and I could see something like that ending up in Rebels too, as Ezra learns more about the Force and kind of decides what path he's going to take. Han Solo, for a while he was rumored to have a cameo in this Rogue One movie. He may still, I guess we'll find out. For George Lucas wanted to put him in episode 3 as like a little kid, and so the Ghost Crew on Rebels has encountered several smugglers and scoundrels of various ilks, and so Han Solo could be one of those. I could see that happening. So I think it's really open that where Rebels kind of fits in, and which on the one hand, okay, yeah, I get it. That's the trend now. Of having this, everyone's kind of copying what Marvel is doing and having TV shows tie into movies and different movies tie together, and at the same time it's like, yeah, but I don't know that everything needs to connect with one another, with everything else, and so finding that balance of, we want to build out, we want to fill in this galaxy, we want to connect these stories, but at the same time, as we've talked about in many ways, in many instances, you don't ever want to feel like you missed something because you didn't read a particular book or see a particular episode of a TV show. And so how they they seem to be doing a pretty good job of that so far, and I trust that it'll never feel like, wow, I guess I was supposed to have done homework to understand this Rebels episode, but I guess that's kind of the balance that they need to strike, I think.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of like Marvel kind of created this monster in the in the 80s with their Secret Wars kind of idea that's like, oh, if you have to read Spider-Man 252 and X-Men 203 and whatnot, so you can get this issue of Secret Wars and understand it, which was annoying 25 years ago, and now it's getting more annoying with, well, I mean, to be perfectly honest, I think George Lucas has to take some responsibility for that, because he all of a sudden did this thing, and this is one of my
everything has to rhyme. You have to.
Yeah, my brother made it this big, and it had never occurred to me when I was watching the Phantom Menace, and when I was still kind of in the afterglow of a new Star Wars movie, and he kind of pointedly said, why does everything, why does Darth Vader, the kid that plays Darth Vader, why does he have to make C-3PO, why does this have to, why do they have to have this, why does everything have to be connected? So I honestly can't sit here and go, oh, well, Disney just wants to milk it for everything it's worth. This is a precedent that was established in the 90s. It's not I think that's just the way that they're going to kind of go. I'm not a huge fan of it, but it does kind of, it's something that I'm going to have to start to expect. Like, even in the books, there's characters in the books that show up in the comics, that show up in other books that may or may not show up in the cartoons. It's this kind of, Yeah, I don't ever want it to get to the point where, yeah, you're confused as to like, and then somebody goes, well, you didn't read the 3-issue miniseries? I'm like, no. Well, then you would. That's why you don't understand why so-and-so is so important. Because that is I honestly don't think that even kids are doing.
Yeah, no.
Are going that deep on it. It's their kind of, they're like kids always. They'll enjoy what they can do and sometimes maybe what they can afford and what they can catch on the certain day or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think we're going to have to kind of make peace with, yes, there's going to be a lot more of that in the future. And I mean, people have talked about this Rogue One, Alden Ehrenreich having been cast as Han Solo. And of course, they're probably in there putting very soft waves in his hair as we speak. You know what I mean? Over in a thing. Because, I mean, Phil Lord and Chris Miller are over there for Celebration. And so I assume they're working. So I wonder if they're going to bring.
They should be in pre-production.
I wonder if they're gonna. If they filmed this Alden Ehrenreich cameo or they didn't even do it. But I assume it's going to be like one of these things that's going to be so minor. He'll be loading boxes onto a ship when somebody walks by and he'll say something and everybody will like, yay! Or it's going to be, which what I really hope it's not going to be is a post-credits thing. Tease. That's a thing I really don't. I
hadn't thought of that.
I don't want post-credits teases in Star Wars movies, but I mean that's my old school way of thinking. I know everyone else is like addicted to, your little movie after the movie, but those are really wearing thin as far as like, well, just scheduling. It's like a lot of times with these movies, it seems like they throw in these bonus things and they're not even quite ready to reveal what they're revealing. So it's very like, or it's completely pointless, like the Avengers 1 shawarma scene, which I will admit was pretty funny in the theater, but under viewing, like every time I watch that movie now, I'm like, yeah, this doesn't really add anything. It was funny once, but
I mean, either I hadn't thought of a post-credit scene, and I think they would do well to just keep that as like a Marvel device, and not try to pair it with Marvel.
Yeah, and it's a very comic booky kind of tease where they can't really do. Well, they've never done I don't think they've ever done a Marvel. Well, I'm talking about Marvel stuff now. Where they've done like, how I complain how even the Star Wars comics have been victim of this, a lot of talky, and then they build up to a big final panel where it's like a full page of whatever they're going to be fighting in the next book. I don't even.
But I think what I most don't want, what I'm most afraid of is some kind of, like wink scene where they're winking at the audience, where some smuggler is working with Jyn Erso or whatever. Jyn Erso herself is like, oh, I'm going to help out the rebellion, and they're in a cantina or something, and Han Solo's like, join the rebellion, I'd never do anything that crazy, or, good luck, you're gonna need it, or something that makes the audience go like, bah, yay. I really hope they avoid anything.
Making my stomach turn just thinking about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think those guys, if it depends on who has control over how they do it. I mean, I think we're still in the realm of people that are Star Wars fans, real Star Wars fans, like they've lived with it. So maybe maybe those guys would get some pushback. I don't know. I mean, I guess that's the problem when you don't have an I was about ready to say that's the problem when you don't have an overriding voice that kind of keeps an eye on these things. But that's.
I mean, they kind of do.
But it's also that's disingenuous because even when George Lucas he would put asinine things in this. Like
it's not a question of like having one person in charge. It's the person who is in charge.
It's I keep thinking back at the. That scene on Kashyyyk in Revenge of the Sith when Yoda gets in the little ship and leaves, and it's like we all know Chewbacca's standing right there. There's no, even though it's not as good of a costume as they did for The Force Awakens, but anyway. And then all of a sudden he goes, "Miss you, I will, Chewbacca." Like I know it's Chewbacca,
right?
You don't have to.
You don't have to put a bell on it.
I think a 5-year-old would have known that was Chewbacca. But anyway, I'm picking nits from 12 years ago. Sorry.
No, that's fine.
I'm kind of excited about season 3 of Rebels because that was the show that has proved the most to me. Like I've talked bad about it, and I'm not the only one because I'm like the guy. Who's that guy? The comedian, the Australian comedian, Steele Saunders.
Oh yeah,
he has that thing about the helicopter thing, and it's like he's obviously on the same wavelength when it comes to that stuff. So I don't feel alone in just like helicopter lightsabers.
Yeah,
but I've picked on that show a good thing, but it's also the one that I'm like. I also think it's like, out of all the things that aren't the movies, it's the one they can have the most fun with, and it's also the one that I'm actually kind of curious how it's all gonna work out in the end.
Yeah, and for my, I've criticized it as well, in part because like I think it's good, and it's so close to being really, really good or great. But it's like it's like they get really close to building something great and then they back away from it, or they put in something completely ridiculous like those spinning lightsaber helicopters, or it's like, do we need Darth Maul again? Like, or hey, Hera, we spent a whole episode talking about Hera and her love of flying, and she got a B-wing, and then that was the last time we ever saw it. Like, and then 6 episodes went by when no one mentioned it again. Like they do stuff like that, and it's like, you were so close to building something, and So to the extent that I criticize it, it's because I like this show and I just want to see it be like really great, and it's they get so close.
I honestly feel that if you could buy Dave Filoni a drink or two, if he's a drinking guy, he'd probably admit that there are extenuating circumstances to why there are helicoptering things, and maybe wrong, maybe not, maybe that's just a decision he made, and he was like,
we just needed a way for this character to suddenly leave.
Why are you picking on me, man? I like helicopters. I was an Airwolf fan as a kid, but
yeah,
I don't know. I some of it feels like, well, if we get this, we got to make it visually exciting. Otherwise, we find out that most kids will turn it off 5 minutes in if we don't have something visually. If there's talking without some kind of visual effect, we find kids will stay on for 5 minutes or something, and they have to put in something because it is the Disney Channel. It's XD, of course, but. They gotta wow those kids, and they're usually watching TV shows where it's a bunch of Weisenheimer tweens calling their dad an idiot in a malt shop. That
idiot.
All young 12-year-olds hang out in malt shops after school.
Sure.
It goes to shit. I'm sure someone's like, I don't think that guy's ever seen a Disney show. There's no malt shop. I'm like, you would be right. I've not watched any of them.
Yeah. Yeah, so like we said earlier, the Star Wars show had this teaser from an upcoming episode today. I expect we'll hear more about what we can expect from season 3 coming out of Celebration. And we talked a little bit about the Han Solo movie. So there are 2 news stories they're a couple weeks old now, but again, we're kind of cleaning up loose ends before we get all of the information out of Celebration. There are kind of 2 stories that I think are related in some way, and so I kind of want to introduce them together, and we can talk about them a little bit, which is, on the one hand, you have James Cameron saying that The Force Awakens lacked, quote, innovative visual imagination, and that he thought, like, J.J. Abrams is a good director, whatever, but, it lacked. Basically, he was making a similar comment to others who, one thing they liked about the prequels is that you had all this innovation in terms of pushing the digital effects, and you had all of these interesting planets that they went to, and costumes and everything. And so they asked James Cameron, I guess. It's like, I don't even know why they would ask him, other than like, well, you're a director, what did you think of this movie? And so he said The Force Awakens lacked innovative visual imagination. The other story that I think is related is Ian McKellen, who is a longtime Star Wars concept artist, is working on the Han Solo movie, and he loves the script. He said this is probably the best script any Star Wars movie has ever had. He thinks fans are really going to like it. But the question there is, with the Han Solo movie, how much does the script actually matter? And, you know, you have Lawrence Kasdan co-writing it with his son, and as I have said numerous times on this show, on this podcast, we really don't have a lot of evidence that anyone other than Lawrence Kasdan knows how to write a Star Wars movie, right? Like, I put a lot of faith in Lawrence Kasdan's ability to write a Star Wars movie. Right. And so, yeah, you know what? Ian McKellen may be right. Maybe this is the best script any Star Wars movie has ever had. The question is, how much does that matter? Both because, you know, of the Lucas legacy, that these are, you know, largely visual films, that, you know, the scripts on some level, you know, the dialogue doesn't really take primacy over the visuals, but then also, you know, like, this is a standalone movie. It's about Han Solo. Everyone kind of knows where he came from, where he ends up. This movie, it's basically like, we just want to see Han Solo and Chewbacca flying around and having fun adventures. So, like, is it the script that's important about this, or is it about Alden Ehrenreich's performance that, like, is going to make or break this movie? Or is it about, again, like, we want to see Han Solo flying around all these crazy planets and meeting crazy aliens and, you know, foiling Jabba the Hutt or whatever. And obviously those are certainly tied to the script and tied to the story, but it's just a matter of emphasis, I guess. And so, what do you think about those two things, either separately or in tandem?
Well, the James Cameron thing, you know, I guess I can't really fault, because, I mean, he's putting his money where his mouth is, because, you know, if you spend any time watching, if you know anything about, and I just, in general, I'm talking to the listeners and to you, if you've done any kind of reading or watching about what kind of filmmaker James Cameron is, he is hands-on to the umpteenth. And I don't, obviously he hasn't made a movie since Avatar, but, like, I'm thinking back to the best documentation would have been for Aliens, which was kind of like, he'd made the Terminator, and then he was hired to do Aliens, and he wrote the script, and then he was brought on, and what people... And
that's, I mean, I don't know. When I hear this, part of me said, yeah, but you're you've just done a lot of sequels, and you're making 5 Avatar films now. So, like, how much can he talk about, like, oh, well, they all have to be visually imaginative, when, you know, a lot of his work, and, you know, this is unfair on some level, but, you know, I think a lot of the work that made him famous was taking the work of the original film and just kind of building on it. But then the flip side of that is, like, yeah, there are a lot of neat visual things in those movies that he was building off of, you know, even in Terminator 2 or Aliens or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of where he comes from. He is an artist. That's pen to paper, I think, in the most purest sense of the thing, is how he operates. That's his first concern. I mean, even the idea that, like, you know, it's a IMDb trivia thing. The nude sketch of Kate Winslet is actually Cameron has sketched that, and I think he sketched it from, you know, from his mind. He didn't make her sit there. And I mean, if we could, you want to break down, like, the idea of, like, the kind of stories that he tells. It's like, he is not a writer. There is not any big plot stuff that is like, wow, he reinvented it. I mean, people go, well, the Terminator, well, he got sued by Harlan Ellison and lost the lawsuit. That, you know, that the idea of the Terminator is kind of a twist of an Outer Limits episode, I think. I think it's Outer Limits. Maybe it's Twilight Zone. I don't want to have the Albert Brooks, Dan Aykroyd argument.
Right.
But he successfully sued for at least a cut of the money. And so my point is like, you know, what's his other? He did sequels. The Abyss is kind of an original idea, but some people have...
Sure.
And I think that Cameron tends to respond on a visual sense. I mean, I guess that's my point. And I can kind of say this is a guy, from having watched all this behind the scenes stuff, when he was making Aliens, he wasn't just sitting behind that camera going, let's get this shot. He was in the model thing going with the cord, yanking the face huggers off of a table to try to do a visual test to see how effectively they could create this action in the movie with just a wire. And like, he's admonishing the guys who are actually well-known model makers that, like, why aren't you guys wearing gloves? You can't pull this cord. You can't do it right. He was like, he is the kind of guy that if he could clone himself to 200 people and he could do it all, he would do it. Now, yes, the downside of that is that he's probably not a very nice dude. He's what he's working with, you know, and he has a very, very, very determined viewpoint, and that's kind of why he makes deeply original films. I'm not going to say they're all great, because I'm not I've seen Avatar like 3 or 4 times, and I still can't say that I think it's a good movie, because it's so superficial in its story, and it just, it's tiresome. And even some of his other movies have been like that. They're kind of almost like riffs on things. So I can kind of understand that, like, a baby boomer director kind of looking at another baby boomer director having been kind of, under his own power. He left his franchise, and then a young guy, I guess JJ's a Gen X guy coming around.
Yeah.
And it's like, there is kind of this, honest criticism you could make of the creative minds of kind of the Gen X generation, is that we do have this kind of idea where we kind of riff on things that came before, and rather than creating the things of our own. It's like, well, all our life we've wanted to have our chance to run Star Wars, and now we do. But but the concerns that J.J. Abrams had, and the concerns that Kathleen Kennedy had, they weren't necessarily grandiose stories. It's really simple, like, well, what did what happened where is Luke Skywalker, which is the big question. I think that's the question.
Yeah, that was the question that hooked J.J. Abrams anyway. But yeah, I mean, her first ideas, her first slate of ideas were, okay, let's pick up this story, 30 years after Return of the Jedi. John Knoll's idea of, like, oh, well, let's, take that one sentence from the opening crawl of A New Hope, and, okay, well, how did they steal the Death Star plans? Let's make a young Han Solo movie, and then, at least for a while, let's make a young Boba Fett movie. Those aren't the most out there, boundary pushing, most left field storylines that you could come up with. Like, those are pretty obvious points to, like, all right, well, let's make a Han Solo movie, and let's make a Boba Fett movie, and let's make a movie that allows us to have, like, Darth Vader in it and the Death Star.
Yeah, and I think if Kathleen Kennedy's question to J.J. Abrams that hooked him was, what does the galaxy look like 30 years after the destruction of the Empire? And that's what hooked him. Maybe there would have been a more visual, but we can go to the art stuff, and there's the art of The Force Awakens. There's a lot of, when they basically said, hey, just spitball some ideas. There were some very interesting imagery going on, but I think at some point they decided, hey, we are literally asking people to step back in behind the wheel of something that we essentially kind of abandoned 30 years ago. If we don't have very similar visual cues or reuse these things, and then we add this whole new concept without familiar characters for the first half an hour of this movie or whatever, it's going to confuse people. They're going to be like, they're not going to be able to connect. So I think he honestly, as much as James Cameron's assessment is completely fair, and I don't think it was, beyond the pale of criticism, that's really not the movie that they were trying to make. And yes, the innovation of Lucas, that, unfortunately, we're going to have to consider that a thing in the past. It is now, it is for lack of a better term, it's corporate product now. And now I'm not saying that a person can't be creative when it's corporate product. That's ridiculous. It's like saying that art, once a person is paid to do art, they're forever compromised. So I'm not saying that as a bad thing, but I am saying that it is a corporate product in the sense that it becomes, used to be George Lucas was the guy that worried about the money, and he was the guy that pulled and clipped chunks of his hair out of his head. We never knew about this stuff until years later. Well, now it's more of a structure, and it's a less of a personal project. As a quick aside, there was an interview with it was a French magazine. It had been translated back into English. So even about John McTiernan, who was a very not very famous, because you probably haven't heard of him, but he had done Die Hard 3, The Predator. He'd been in he was a pretty top-notch director. He'd had some legal issues that's kept him out of the thing, but he's kind of back doing interviews, and he made some very bold statements about movies. He could basically kind of called, the Captain America movies like fascist, and talked about hypermasculinity and all these kind of ideas, where it's kind of like and some people even conceded this might be a bad translation of the interview, but it's this idea where it's like these guys are kind of, who had worked in these genres 30 years ago, are kind of almost complaining about, well, this is the thing that you created. Yes, you had a vision of like, and I don't really understand how the guy who made the first Predator movie could really complain about hypermasculinity.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
There's nothing more like alpha male and stereotypical, idea of a thing as that movie. You
have Schwarzenegger, and you have Jesse
the Body Ventura. We got
Jesse Ventura, Carl Weathers,
Bill Duke. I mean, these guys are like, I forget the guy, the guy who, from Oklahoma, I think he's the Sonny Latham or something. He's these guys that are just like the 80s idea of like possibly enhanced by steroids,
right?
Kind of aggressive, like arms blowing off. If it bleeds, we could kill it. Fuck you. That kind of, which I mean, I love that stuff. I think it's probably not particularly viewed with any value now, but it's like I'm glad that movies aren't like that now necessarily, but I'm happy for they had been that way at some point. But so this idea of this constant reassessment but Cameron is almost kind of, it's like, visual stuff is important, but you also are the guy that created this unquenchable thirst for sequels. Yeah. And because we are human beings and we only get a blip on this planet to exist, is it safe to say that sometimes some of our concepts will far outlive us as humans? And those concepts they don't exist in vacuums. They're going to change over time. People are going to like emphasize masculinity in a different way, or they're going to emphasize the visual thing in a different way. And so, it is a little kind of like these guys are taking pot shots, but then they also have to realize like they helped create this world.
Right. I mean, there's one point I want to go back to, or at least just talking about J.J. Abrams in general, and this is going to bring in a third news item, which isn't. I mean, it's not even really big news, but I was thinking about it in terms similar to the conversation we were having, which is so the Lego Force Awakens video game came out. And I guess J.J. Abrams is a playable character. Like, you can unlock him and play the game as a little Lego representation of J.J. Abrams, which is fine. I mean, but part of me is like, really? Like, what? I guess I just feel like, and I don't want to seem like I'm attacking the guy, but there's this kind of like cult of J.J. Abrams, or this sense of when people found out that he was going to be doing The Force Awakens, there was a sense of like, oh, thank God, like it's in good hands. Like we know he's going to do a good job, and yeah, he did a good job.
Which I didn't. I don't know if I felt that way.
Well, first. Yeah, I guess maybe Star Trek fans were a little more uncertain about it. But even that first, I was thinking about it because I haven't seen a lot of J.J. Abrams stuff. I've seen Force Awakens. I've seen the first Star Trek movie he did. That might be it, honestly. But I guess he, to the extent that he is praised or, keeps getting these jobs, it's not necessarily because of his visual imagination. Like, I don't think he's unimaginative.
Right.
Like, I think he does fine. And he has some decent ideas, but it's not. I guess he's more praised because like he's a decent writer, or at least he has a particular style that people like. And we've talked in the past about it's kind of Spielberg pastiche, which people love Spielberg, so if they get a pastiche of that, it's also going to be popular. He might have decent ideas of commercial, kind of science fiction ideas that are also commercial enough to be successful. I'm trying to come up with, I guess Fringe. He was the producer on Fringe. Like that lasted 5 years.
I always question like
Alias lasted a couple years, and so he can identify things that audiences will enjoy, which is. I'm not downplaying. That's very important. But he's not known as like, wow, he has the most imaginative, visual sense. Like he puts stuff on the screen that we've never seen before. That's not really what you're getting with J.J. Abrams. And so, it's, to that extent, I think Cameron's criticism is fair. But what were we to expect with J.J. Abrams as the director? Like, yeah, he did a good job. He didn't wreck the ship. It moved along. We have characters that we liked. We got to see the Millennium Falcon do neat stuff, and that's I think that's a pretty solid day for J.J. Abrams.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. It's like you get. It's the idea that J.J. It's the difference between like a guy like Cameron who basically. His mythology looms large. He's the guy that somebody dosed them all on the set of what movie was it? It was either The Abyss or Titanic. Mm-hmm. Someone put LSD in somebody's food, and he actually saw that people were tripping, and he like caused himself. He like made himself throw up so he wouldn't get dosed with LSD and like lose a day of shooting. And he's also the guy who going back, tying this into Star Wars, in 1977, he was a truck driver. He's a Canadian truck driver who drew pictures, and he saw Star Wars and said, if I'm going to do something with my life, I have to quit driving this truck and I have to move to Hollywood. And so it's important to him. Whereas, a guy like J.J. Abrams, it's like he grew up in this industry. I think I think his dad was a casting director or something like that. It's like the idea of, dreaming big versus the idea like you grew up in a family that you knew that this was possible, that this is a job that people do. Where I think you end up, I'm not diminishing those experiences because I wouldn't blame a person just by the circumstance of their birth that, yes, I was born in a family that we were in entertainment. That's actually it's a shortcut, but it won't get you very far. It just it merely shows you that it's possible, that if you're willing to put in the work and the thing. I mean, he's kind of, JJ is like one of these guys where his public persona, and I don't know anything about him as a private person, but everyone who's ever met him has said he's a very nice guy. But he's also not gonna want to be controversial. He's not gonna want to. He's not an envelope pusher. There's really no way. And I guess to tie it back into what you were talking about, Ian McCraig's assessment of this Han Solo script, it'll be interesting if he's saying that this is the best script he's ever read because it's an envelope pusher or it's a status quo type, just a good Star Wars story. And I don't know if the requirement for a Han Solo movie is to be an envelope pusher aside from the fact that, there is the two pivot points of this whole thing is it falls right on Alden Ehrenreich's performance.
Mm-hmm.
Like, not even if he looks exactly like Harrison Ford, because I don't honestly, it's like, as I get older, the idea that, Chris Pine doesn't look anything like William Shatner, that like doesn't really bother me. Kind of,
yeah.
Like I can make the jump.
Right.
I mean, sometimes actors get old, and sometimes sometimes that you can't go back, or sometimes an actor passes away, or there's they just don't come on for sequels. It's like that used to be really hard for me when they recast. Now it's not such a big deal, but
right.
Script is everything in this Han Solo movie, because it's really on the idea, if they don't make something that is a great standalone movie of a character who's going to be, we're going to be introduced to Alden Ehrenreich as a character named Han Solo. He actually is setting the stage in a strange way that he has to because they're going to be reframing this whole idea of what we understand to be Han Solo cinematically, because it's like the way that Harrison Ford was able to bookend a performance from 40 years ago. This guy is going to have to bookend it in a he has a much larger task, and I don't think that I mean that it has to be like, well, if they don't tie it into his personal growth that he has between A New Hope and Jedi, I don't mean that so much as that they honestly have to make a singular story that will, remain true to the character, a few years later when we get the Harrison Ford version. Mm-hmm. So it's like, I think it's almost like it's almost like they do have to remake Star Wars in this only in this A New Hope is what I mean. Mm-hmm. A New Hope, in the sense that A New Hope is the only Star Wars movie that you can walk away from and say, that was great. I don't need to see anything else. I've got a complete story right there.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what they need to do with this Han Solo movie. It's like, if it's got a great script, that's great. It should be a movie that someone should say, I don't like Star Wars. I don't understand Star Wars. Will I still like this movie? And they have to say yes. You can't just be like, oh, this is where I got my Corellian blood stripe. This is why I have this blast tech. I understand that the idea that finding Chewbacca and maybe the Millennium Falcon might be plot points. I kind of hope they're not, but
well, I mean, I was just thinking about this, and I would bet that they might be, only because let me back up. So on IMDb, J.J. Abrams' father was a producer, and he's produced like 70 something movies, and he has multiple awards and everything. But under the J.J. Abrams biography section of IMDb, there's a trademark section. I don't know. IMDb adds these crazy things all the time, but his trademark, the first entry says high-tech, action-packed entertainment. And I think that's a pretty fair assessment, right? It's not bad, but it's
right.
It's entertainment. It's going to move along at a decent pace where there's going to be, space battles or, a fight between people. There's going to be action. There's going to be technology involved. Thus high-tech, action-packed. And that's decent. And then in terms of his visual style, there was a blog post that we talked about before The Force Awakens came out about based on the trailer. It was talking about sort of J.J. Abrams' visual style and maybe what we can expect. And really, the only things I remember, I think really the only notable elements of his visual style are lens flare, right? Yeah. And that's not really a visual style. That's a thing that's like a technique that you put in a lot, but that's not really a visual style. And then maybe the snap zoom, when Rey and Finn are flying the Millennium Falcon on Jakku and they're being chased by the TIE fighters, and they fly off far away from the camera, and the camera snaps and zooms. The snap zoom, it zooms real close, really fast to them as they're flying into the Star Destroyer. Again, that's not really a visual style. That's like a camera move. So there's not really other than those, I wouldn't say that J.J. Abrams has a distinctive visual style. And I also, to bring in the Han Solo thing, I mean, I also don't think that's something you could say of Phil Lord and Chris Miller, really. I mean, they don't have as many movies to their credit as J.J. Abrams does, but, you know, their filmography as directors thus far, you have, I guess they worked on Clone High, right? So they were supervising directors on Clone High. Then they have Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, the Lego Movie, and the 21 Jump Street and 22 Jump Street movies, right? And so those 21 and 22 Jump Street movies are really the only fully live action films they've done. And, you know, I guess I've seen a couple episodes of Clone High. I've seen the Lego Movie now. I watched it on the plane coming back from Europe. And then I saw part of 22 Jump Street, which was awful. But, you know, the Lego Movie, it's fun, but I guess it's visually inventive in the sense of like animating all of these Legos, but they're digital Legos to begin with. But, you know, that kind of like action-packed entertainment, that's about how I would describe Phil Lord and Chris Miller's work, at least their film work. So, you know, we're getting maybe kind of a similar style of director of, yeah, they're going to keep things moving, they're going to make sure it's fun and everyone's entertained, but, you know, this question of whether they're going to push the visual boundaries with this movie, like, I don't know. I could see it going in one of two directions, right? Either they really push the boundaries and he goes to all these crazy planets and it becomes almost sort of like the Indiana Jones films where they go to or a James Bond movie where they go to all these exotic locations, but since we're in space, we can push that level of exotic even further. Or, you know, it really becomes about the character. And I think with Lawrence Kasdan being the writer, I think maybe that's where it's going to be focused, is really on the character. And you know, I think what interests Lawrence Kasdan about Han Solo is this character and his relationships to people. And you know, I think that's one reason he agreed to come back and do The Force Awakens is, you know, instead of Luke Skywalker, it's, okay, so what is Han Solo doing 30 years later? It's not, oh, we want you to write, you know, what the galaxy looks like 30 years later. That's they had Michael Arndt for that. You know, for Kasdan, it was, okay, so what is Han Solo up to, essentially? And building and developing what the Solo family, I guess, has been doing and been up to. Yeah. And so for this Han Solo movie, you know, you think maybe he's going to take a similar approach, and if it's about Han Solo's relationships to people or the world around him, the galaxy around him, you know, what the most obvious of those relationships is between him and Chewbacca. And I guess it's harder to do that with a character like Chewbacca just coming in and have those two, they're already paired up, and then it's just them encountering other things, because, you know, part of the reason Chewbacca works so well is because he's aided by having everyone else around him just kind of reacting to him and understanding what he says. But if it's just him and Han, then maybe, you know, sure, people seeing the movie, they understand that relationship already, but if you want to develop that relationship, and I think, you know, if Kasdan is interested in focusing on that relationship and developing that relationship, then maybe he's going to feel like he has to start from the beginning and say, okay, how did this come to be the pair that we know in A New Hope, you know, rather than like, well, we're just going to take it for granted that they're already pals and go from there, because anyone else he develops a relationship with, they're going to be gone by the time we get to A New Hope, right? And so having that time, investing that time in developing Han Solo's relationship with a love interest or some other friend of his, you know, it's not gonna resonate as much with the audience as maybe, you know, okay, here's how he and Chewbacca met and how they came to be such fast friends, you know.
Yeah, I think that's it's kind of almost like the prequel problem that I was thinking of, because, like I said, I decided to pick a Star Wars movie to watch last night, and I was watching Revenge of the Sith, and it put me in mind about how the concept of gosh, what's the word I'm thinking of? The idea, we already know what how the story's going to end. Like Luke and Leia are going to get born, and their mother's probably going to die because at the time we knew that she was gone. And so it's like, well, yeah, and the overriding mythos of Star Wars, which they might totally not adhere to this, because even Lucas was about ready to jettison this concept, because his original Episode 3, which was going to have a young Han Solo cameo, he was going to be kind of like a Mowgli kid from the Jungle Book, almost like the idea he was this kid in tattered rags who lived amongst the creatures, and that he would just going to be like handing a clone trooper a something for their weapon or something. It was just going to be a brief thing, which completely discounts the idea that, like, no, Han Solo he's orphaned on Corellia, and he grew up to be, he joined the Empire as a cadet, and then he was ordered to shoot a Wookiee or something, and he said he wouldn't do it, and they had an uprising, and that's how he left the Empire. So, I mean, I don't believe that they won't necessarily since they've been throwing a lot of stuff to the wind, I don't know if that's going to be the story they're going to tell, but yeah. I mean, the idea that of him befriending Chewbacca is probably going to loom large in this. I don't even want to say hopefully, because I don't know if they have a great story to tell, then I will be interested in that. But I guess at some point they're going to have to establish that he went against his better judgment, or he went against his heart. And it went wrong, which would inform that, 20 years later or 10 years later, he went against his heart, or whatever his brain told him, like, don't hang out with these rebels, you're going to get blown up, and then he changes his mind. I mean, I think that they might want to establish some idea that one day he did tell somebody, like, yeah, I can't help you, and he left, and he always regretted it. And that's kind of informs the decision later on when he says, so long, kid. And then he, halfway out of the system, he decides, this is a stupid idea. I need to go help these people. I can't let this happen again.
Right.
I mean, I think that would be an interesting kind of thing. Whereas, yeah, a love story would be, we all know it's not going to go well, because, and I don't think we really want that idea. That's like the idea that, like, oh, well, he had a love affair as a young man, and it completely changed his worldview. It's like, did you ever see the movie Young Sherlock Holmes?
No, I don't think I did.
So it was famous because it was one of the first big CGI movies that ILM did, and the whole point of it is that the young Sherlock Holmes has an adventure with the young John Watson, or whatever his name is, and in the Holmes has a love interest in this thing, and she dies at the end. Sorry, spoiler alert. But it establishes this idea that this is why Sherlock Holmes is a emotionally closed off, tortured man. Why he's more invested in observation than he really is invested in he's invested in observation rather than emotion. And I'm kind of hoping that they're not going to kind of a lot of times these movies, when they try to do a young version of something, they create this pivotal thing that completely changes the person's personality, which I always find, at least, is an interesting plot point, but it maybe not be emotionally true. It's this idea of, like, well, your personality is being constantly formed through experience. It's rather, okay, there are some people, like, I went to war at 17 and it changed me as a person.
Right.
There are huge catalysts. Like, sorry, I keep hitting the microphone, but I don't know. It's
that reminds me. Did you read the thing? I wasn't even going to talk about this because I didn't want to dignify it, but apparently, Lucas, I can't remember if this was for the video game that never surfaced, or the live action TV show that didn't come around, or I can't remember the context in which I was reading this, but apparently he had this idea to show a younger Palpatine in love with some woman, and then she breaks his heart, and that's when he turns to the dark side. Basically, this is he gets scorned by a woman, and then he becomes evil because the woman he loved, that's such a horrible idea on so many levels.
Yeah, that is. Well, I mean, that's a very that is that was for the TV show, I guess.
I guess so.
I guess it was. It was supposed to be one aspect because I think it was going to be an anthology type series. I don't. Think
yeah.
And I think it was the whole, Sheev Palpatine gets his heart broken. I mean, the truth is like they've done that story before, but it goes to show you that it's like one. I think he had probably I think George had run out of ideas for Star Wars.
Yeah, I think that's.
And I'm not trying to discount him, but I mean, looking in 2016, what would if you go, hey, new Star Wars movie, new Star Wars TV show, now we're going to find out that all of this happened because some woman betrayed his love. I mean, that's. I understand that that's a plot device. But it also is the plot device of someone that doesn't keep up with kind of narrative trends about this idea that, like, yes, that is a choice a person can make, but what is the overall message you're sending someone that, like, well, if she had just been a sport, maybe this woman rebuffs him because he's not handsome or whatever reason that a person would rebuff
because she was so here we go. So it was that she was this gangster and who heartless, gangster woman who wronged the emperor. It's like,
yeah, I know. I mean, it's gosh, I shouldn't even.
But again, like, so it's a woman's fault now.
I'm not gonna pussyfoot around this because it's like, I feel like. Yeah, if you're making a story that basically Palpatine, the Emperor, is Elliot Rodger, you know what I mean? The guy that shot up that college, that little sicko. Yeah, it's like, it's so out of step with, And
it's out of step. I don't even know that it was a good idea to begin with. Like, I don't even know if there certainly was a point in time in which, like, a lot of people would be making those kinds of stories, but, like, I don't even know that those were a good idea.
But I mean, it's all these idiomatic, like the manic pixie girl and the all this trope that in movies about where characters suffer through mental illness. The idea that all you need is a really good relationship with somebody and that it'll fix your mental illness. I mean, these are kind of. It's almost like these tropes are they don't work anymore. You kind of have to realize that, that's just not how we see things anymore. And I don't want to say dangerous. It's just, when I read all that, I was just like, really? He's going to go this, we go from being like, well, evil versus good. And we're not going to really explore what evil and good is to, no, we're going to explore it. And his evil was from the fact he was rebuffed by a romantic suitor or whatever. He was sued, and it's just like, it's just so. Yeah, I mean, I don't even know how to articulate my unhappiness of that, where that going down that road. That's why. I mean, I guess, and to tie it in, and I feel like I'm like pontificating too much today. That is why Star Wars doesn't work with some of the bigger issues in our lives. Yeah, it's not an allegory that a lot of people want it to be. At least in my opinion. Whereas Star Trek, I feel, at least in its classic sense, was a great way for people to kind of every weekly. They could do it 22, 26 times a year. They could go like, hey, we're going to talk about this issue, but we're not going to spell it out. Whereas Star Wars, it's like, it's a multimedia exploration, but like that's why I think that TV series, like a long form live action TV series is a mistake for this show. For this property. It's like, you get into this idea that you.
Well, and also, like, where in Joseph Campbell is the, like, I mean, I think you're right that Star Wars and particularly Lucas are on more solid ground when they're invoking kind of timeless themes or, archetypes that are really genderless. I mean, they became gendered through time, but they're really like the hero's journey in the broadest, most generic sense. Like, there's nothing that says that hero has to be like a man,
No.
or a straight man, whatever.
Because romance is secondary in these stories,
right. And that's what made Star Wars so appealing, is because it initially, at least, the original trilogy, it kind of dealt on that very kind of broad level, and then different people could kind of put different things into it that they saw, or connect with it. That a broad audience could connect with it because it was, it was so archetypical. But I mean, I don't, once you start down the dark path,
exactly.
Once you start saying like, it was a woman's fault that Palpatine turned evil and that we got all this other stuff. It's like, well, you're not really attracting the broadest audience there. Like, you're attracting you will attract some people. There will be some people who will think that's interesting, but you're kind of limiting the growth potential of your audience in some ways with that, and so it's, I don't think he, as particularly Lucas, like, deals with politics in a broadly defined politics very well either. But that in particular, it's you need to keep it archetypical and broad, guys. Like, let's not, once you start making some of the stuff so specific, and so once you start giving more detail, like, then you kind of lose the forest for the trees, I think, to invoke a cliche.
Yeah, and I guess that's kind of, and it's funny too, because I've always kind of rallied against some of the lack of complexity of Anakin's conversion to the dark side, and that, like, they should have really ramped up, like, there had been talk about a love triangle between Obi-Wan and they kind of like tried to that's at least what worked on Anakin, right? That, like, that idea was presented, and it worked on him, that, like, maybe Padme and Obi-Wan are up to something, and maybe they're together. And there are little hints. There's a little hints about that, and the funny thing is that I think what Lucas was trying to portray at least 10, 12 years ago is the idea that, like, when you start second guessing your friends and you start thinking you own somebody, that's the dark path. And it's like, well, now all of a sudden, I guess maybe that's the point. I mean, if you, and since I actually never see this, I've never seen this, jilted, Sheev Palpatine script, and maybe I'm rallying against something that, like, Lucas would say, that's not what I was saying at all, or that's not what the actual script, so I think I need to calm down a little bit. It's not like I think that, I don't think in his old age it's
something that's certainly not, like, you read that and go, like, yeah, I could see George Lucas thinking that's a good idea. It's not out of the realm of possibility.
I mean, I guess my point is that, when you start getting into the minutia of these things, or it's like, it gets muddled, and it becomes less fun. It's like one of the things where I think that generally what's supposed to be fun about Star Wars is that, anybody can come in, and even some of the old ones where it's like, representation isn't very good because we're almost non-existent. They could say, well, okay, but I'm going to make peace with that because I enjoy the story. There's nothing implicit or explicit about the story that says that we reject the idea of diversity, but it was a 40-year-old movie or whatever, and let's just enjoy it for what it is, and look forward to the future kind of idea. And boy, I tell you, I start getting worked up on these, and I keep going back in weird circles about, I think it's doing this, I think it's not doing this. But I mean, I think that's the problem when we try to make these movies overly complex, And like I said, there's obviously a reason why that live action thing didn't bloom. And maybe it was things like these scripts and stuff, and people are like, yeah, I understand what you're going here, but this isn't the story we want to tell. Because I think he wanted to get, I don't know if he ever got to the funding stage with these things, or he just sat down with ABC and let them flip through the scripts, and then they made the decision not to go forward.
They passed, yeah.
it'll be interesting. I mean, I'm not trying to indict Lucas as a storyteller, but I am trying to indict Lucas's inability to tell, you know,
certain kinds of stories.
Certain kind of stories. It's like, yeah, you just don't really, you know.
This is not in your wheelhouse. Yeah, you need to let this one go.
Women die in these movies because, out of heartbreak, which is a very kind of, you know, even romantic literature from 200 years ago, people would kind of, there was parodies of these kind of things even back then, where people would go, "Oh, she died from a broken heart." Well, yeah, it doesn't really happen.
Yeah,
but anyway, we should.
Let's.
You want to wrap up or what?
Well, we can talk about the last couple of weeks of comics.
Yeah,
I guess
do some
a little
comics,
bit.
and then I'll chill the F out.
Yeah. Well, so I think 4 issues have come out in the last couple of weeks. Darth Vader 22, Han Solo 2, Poe Dameron 4, and then the Force Awakens comic adaptation. Issue number 1. You have read 2 of those.
Yes,
right?
I'm up on Han Solo and I'm up on Poe Dameron.
Yeah. I mean, Darth Vader. The story is iterating forward ever more. You know, the big reveal in issue 22 of Darth Vader is that apparently Void Gazer had at one point been assigned to Darth Vader's flagship, the Executor. She sabotaged it, and so Silo is crashing his cybernetic whale ship into the Executor. The Emperor is also on board, but he sailed off and relatively safe. So, you know, the story is inching towards the conclusion. And, you know, I think this one was certainly more exciting than issue 21, but it's like, all right, I want this wrapped up. I want to get to the payoff here. The Force Awakens comic adaptation, I didn't really care for it myself. You know, Robert, if you pick it up, you might say differently, although we talked a little bit about...
I've seen some images.
Some of the images, yeah. I mean, for me, yeah, I still had a problem with some of the images. You know, Poe Dameron looked way too old. You know, too many lines in the face, that kind of thing. For me is obviously The Force Awakens is a 2-hour plus movie that if you're going to try to fit into a 5-issue comic series, like, you're going to have to make some edits, and I don't really like a lot of the edits that they made to the beginning of the Force Awakens story. You know, they took out a lot of the moments that in the movie, you know, were really, you know, I think visually kind of cool, or, you know, that allowed the audience to kind of settle in and understand who these characters are. And, you know, the shots of Rey, I'm going to spoil it a little bit, you know, the shots of Rey as a scavenger, you know, going through, you know, spelunking through that Star Destroyer and kind of riding the sand, you know, down the sand dune, you know, those are not there in the comic. And, you know, the conversation, just the very beginning, the conversation with, between Poe Dameron and Lor San Tekka is gone. You know, Finn, there's a lot of Finn story in the beginning that's missing. He, like, the first time you see him, he already has the blood on his helmet. So everything up to that point is kind of gone too, which is sort of important, I think. And so it's just, yeah, you know, a lot of the beginning of the movie, a lot of the things that, you know, I think a lot of the audiences liked and responded to and helped build who these characters are not there in the comic. And so I was a little disappointed by that. So I didn't particularly care for it, but others may like it. So let's get to Han Solo number 2 and Poe Dameron number 4. Is there one that you want to talk about first?
Yeah, let's talk about the Han Solo, because I want to.
Okay.
We were talking about him, and I want to be positive about something.
Yeah. So I really like the Han Solo comic.
Yeah.
A lot. I think it's probably I think it's the best mini series comics they've done, and it might be like the best overall out of all of them.
Yeah, it's true to the character.
It's written really well. The artwork is cool. Yeah, I really like it.
I'm kind of like, I actually went out and physically, listen to this, cutting the plastic out. I actually bought a physical copy of this thing. Which I don't have a comic book store nearby. My Barnes and Noble is woefully understocked on Star Wars comics. I mean, the only thing I will say, art style wise, I'm no expert on comic art, which we've established many a time. is this idea that so they come up with these beautiful images, which I assume computers are a big part of how comics are drawn now.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a mutual friend that works in the industry a little bit, and I don't think he ever uses paper and pen ever.
Yeah.
I could ask him probably. I should call him and ask him,
get
his assessment of this.
So I should say during my vacation in Europe, I went to the comic strip museum in Brussels. So I have a little more knowledge of how these things are put together than at least I used to. And yeah, my impression from that is to the extent that anyone uses, actual physical paper and draws on paper anymore, any of these comic artists, they do that and then they scan it into the computer and go from. I think there's a lot of digital artwork going on.
So I'm looking at this. Well, we don't have to do a page by page, but I will just use this as an example. So there's this great opening shot, which just throws you into it on the first issue. This is issue 2, guys. Issue 1.
Right. So issue 1 ends. They're in this race.
Did we talk about issue 1 already?
We must have.
I think. Well, let's just do just a quick thing. Basically, Han. Takes place right after A New Hope. Han has kind of said, I'm going to go do some of my Han things, go back to my old business. But he's had issues already where it kind of like that little seed of the rebellion of being part of something bigger than yourself is now in kind of a pull from his roguish ways. When Princess Leia basically calls him up and says, hey, I'm sorry, he's turning down jobs because he's afraid of getting caught. He's playing it more safe. Right. And it's bothering him and it's cutting into his
and he doesn't, now that he's tied to this rebellion, he doesn't want to take on jobs that are kind of morally iffy as well. That's part of it. Right.
And then Princess Leia basically wants him to do this race. It's the it's the Boonta Eve of space or whatever.
Right.
And
it's the dragon something.
Yeah, the dragon, I forget it's not even important. But so he's in a space race and the first shot, it's like this,
right. I think the pitch for it's like Cannonball Run, but in outer space.
Yes.
And Leia gets him to do it because while he's doing this race, he'll be picking up rebel spies and informants and taking them to safety. So
he plays to his adequate ego and it right into the. So the first shot is like this great collection of spaceships and stuff. But have you noticed they do this thing now where they literally digitally blur stuff to kind of create?
Yeah.
And I don't like
it. On Solo 1, right, he's the race has started, they show up, I guess at the first stop. I'm not really sure how this race works, but they show up at the first stop and all of these other ships are getting blown up that are part of the race and they don't know what's happening. And so in the beginning of Han Solo number 2, you figure it out that there are all these bombs or something that are blowing up these ships. And the way this page is done, it's done almost like a camera effect where the Millennium Falcon is sharp and some of the ships around it are in focus, but the ships further away and sort of in the background are out of focus, and it's great. And the first time I read it, I was completely thrown. I was like, are my contacts not the right?
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like I wear reading glasses, and I was like, oh man, I don't know if this is a new trend. That's my only ding on this thing is that generally the art is actually really good. The representation of Han is good. The Chewbacca is really good. The ships,
pacing of the story is
a fantastic comic. Even the aliens and it's a top to bottom classic Star Wars fill in the blank kind of. It doesn't really mean anything in the grand scheme, but it's a really fun story kind of comic. But this weird digital blurring in the space battles, I really don't like it. It just really. I know that they're trying to create a sense of forward motion, of speed, but I have a very limited skills with Photoshop. I've done stuff, and I have used the blurring as just to try things out, and I never stick with it because it always seems to be that all it does is make things blurry. It doesn't actually give the sense, whereas 30, 40 years ago there would have just been lines behind it showing the thing. It's like, and maybe that's just a sea change in the way comic books are told, but I wish they'd stop it. Anyway, I was going to be positive. That was my whole thing.
No, but beyond that, and if it's I think it's like I said, I think it's the best probably Star Wars comic that they put out.
Yeah.
Since they switched back to Marvel, it's really good. Now, I mean, we're only on issue 2, but
we're up to
issue really
4 on another series, and that
yes, Poe Dameron, which it sounds like we might have a difference of opinion on this one. So Poe Dameron number 4. The first 3 issues of Poe Dameron, right? He's trying to find Lor San Tekka. He's basically tracing Lor San Tekka's path. They get to this planet where there's this cult waiting for some big egg to hatch, or they're protecting the egg. The Empire, or the First Order tracks them down. Agent Terex tracks him down there. They talk for a while. These big dinosaurs come out of the egg. They fight. And that's kind of the end, and Poe Dameron and Terex go their separate ways. But the cult tells Poe Dameron where Lor San Tekka went, and the last line of the issue 3 is we're going to prison. So now we pick up with the story in issue 4. It starts out with Black Squadron. They have some downtime between their missions, and so they're all in the locker room, or the Snap and his love interest are talking about that, how they are into each other, and
Jess. That's because that's how adults talk about being in a relationship.
Yeah. Jess is talking to her tech, and the tech really wants to be a pilot, but he can't be for some reason, and so they're talking about that. And Poe is talking to Lulo, who first appeared in the Shattered Empire comic, and so Lulo, flew with Poe Dameron's mother, and so they're talking about how Lulo is being too aggressive, and he's, basically he's sort of letting the First Order know where they are, and that they're going to fight them. So Poe Dameron's saying back off that a little bit. And then after that, they go to the planet Megalox Beta, which is an awful name for a planet.
If you eat too many spicy peppers, you got to get that Megalox Beta.
Yeah.
That's what it sounds like. Oh, God, hon, those green peppers, Megalox Beta.
Yeah. And so they Megalox Beta because they are there to see Gracchus the Hutt. Last seen in the Star Wars comic, he's the Hutt who collects all those Jedi artifacts. Megalox Beta is a high-gravity planet, so basically there are no walls. There's not really a prison. There's a bubble where they control the gravity, and there are no guards, there are no walls, because if the prisoners try to escape, they're just going to die from the high gravity. And so the prisoners essentially govern themselves. Gracchus has built this fortress. He built a castle for himself on this in this bubble, and so he's kind of running things that way.
I like that. I will admit.
Yeah,
I
like the idea
concept.
of
I like
Megalox.
that.
And so, surprise, Agent Terex beat them there, and he's waiting for Poe Dameron. Gracchus has information about Lor San Tekka, but he's only going to tell one of them, either Poe or Terex, whichever one breaks him out of the prison.
As he's luxuriating in an enormous life-size bowl of beef stew or something.
Right. He basically just wants out of the prison, and whoever breaks him out will get the information about Lor San Tekka. That's the plot of this comic. So what are you? So what are your discontents with this?
Okay, so in and of itself, that's actually a perfectly serviceable story. I like the idea of Megalox, whatever.
Megalox, I like the idea of Megalox Beta, not so much the name.
Megalox Beta, the idea that, space prisons, as much as I complain about
you
tropes,
and your space prisons.
I like space prisons. I like the idea that anyway, I won't go off on that, but my point is this incessant getting to know all your favorite Star Wars guys thing, where it's they lit the dialogue. If I gave two, I'm trying to follow your lead and not curse.
I don't do a great job of that. So
the same old BS of this idea where they're all just sitting around, where his Poe, he's talking to the guy, he's like, I really need it. That's the good stuff. They just talk about these things, they say we need to blow off steam. I mean, I've never sat around with people on a nice day and said, boy, it sure feels good to blow off steam. I mean, it's this idea, like, it's established. They're sitting around, they're drinking beverages. We know that they're not, you know, this thing, it's like, and then Snap and his girlfriend, like, so here we are, Snap, back at the base. And then he goes, back at the base. Something you wanted to tell me? Well, now it's awkward, Kare. And then they're having this whole conversation with their, why don't they just have them be like in bed or something, you know, even though I'm like complaining like there shouldn't be sex in Star Wars, but you can like imply that like, well, you know, they're back at the base. Why don't they hit the freaking bunks?
Right.
You know,
but like you said, like this isn't really how adults talk.
If they're in love, just have them be like, you know, eating dinner or something. They're still in their flight gear. If they're like just through a stressful thing and they're back at the base and they're in love, wouldn't they just be back knocking boots or at least be intimate together emotionally? Instead, they're just kind of touching faces and they're talking to each other like they just got done with a job interview, and you're just like, you know, it's just like they're talking about what they want out of their relationship, and it's like, oh, come on. I mean, yeah,
this relationship that we just found out like in the previous issue and really have no real investment in at this point, you know.
It's basically if you are doing a poorer job showing now this is a stretch for you nerds, but what's that movie? You probably haven't seen it. It was a PC game back in the 80s and 90s that was kind of a made-up Star Wars-y kind of thing, and Mark Hamill did some voices for it. And they made a movie with Freddie Prinze Jr. and Matthew Lillard. Wing Commander.
Wing
now,
Commander.
that's a bad movie. I mean, it's a bad movie, but there are some great interactions. They're all pilots, and they're in a war, and there's tons of great reactions of interactions between like the rivalry, the idea, the kind of like who's king or queen of the roost kind of thing. It's very it's actually very egalitarian gender wise. Like actually some of the best pilots are women, and they know it, and they're not afraid to tell the dude, you know, that kind of, it's heightened because they're in a goddamn war. And this thing where they're all just like, let's sit around and talk about our feelings. It's like these guys in Wing Commander, which I'm not saying that you should go watch Wing Commander. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
There's a lot.
But yeah, it's like, a more realistic portrayal of like, okay, in this particular situation.
This is the way I think that real people that fight. I'm not saying that they wouldn't be interested in each other romantically, because there's tons of that in that movie. It's a whole subplot, but it's the idea of, you know, they have their own language, they have their own rules, that kind of, if they're really trying to establish this Black Squadron as being, you know, something that we really need to, you know, keep an eye on for like some great stories, let's make it more real. Let's make it, you know, let's not have it be like, okay, we're back at the base, let's talk about our feelings, our hopes, our dreams. Like, let's make it more rough and tumble, because there's going to be a lot more exposition in the later issue with this idea of Terex comes back and we have this mission. And, I mean, they could have spent a lot more time on this planet and the idea of them getting there rather than, you know, everybody just kind of sitting around in a bar.
Yeah. I mean, it's also the other thing too that I was thinking of is it kind of takes the focus off of Poe Dameron, right?
Yeah, well, like this whole series has been taking the focus off of Poe Dameron.
And I get the impulse to like, oh, let's make a thing about Black Squadron because, you know, the Rogue Squadron books were super popular, and this is kind of the next iteration of that idea. And so you want to develop all of these characters and everything, but you know, Poe Dameron's name is on the thing,
right?
And so it's like, well, you know, I'm trying to think of, you know, in the Leia comic, they didn't spend pages and pages of like Nine Numb just kind of like off doing his own thing or like talking to his girlfriend or whatever. Or, you know, the Lando comic, you know, it had a love interest for Lobot, but like Lando was in the room while all of that was happening and like contributing to the conversation, you know? And so it's like, is is this a Poe Dameron comic, and is it a Black Squadron comic? And if it's a Black Squadron comic, either like they need to call it that, or they need to do a better job of like making these people interesting.
Yeah, it's
because
like,
right now
that's a much better way of putting it than my ramblings. It's this idea that, you know, decide what you're going to do and do it. Don't make your nameplate guy a guest star in his own series, because really Poe Dameron's the way he's depicted, like there's, you know, I always feel like, man, you're doing a real disservice to what's his name? What's Poe Dameron? What's the actor? Oscar Isaac's portrayal of it, which he did a lot with very little, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. He didn't have a lot to go with, and now this comic they can expand it, and they haven't given them much to do. He talks kind of like a Disney kid, like one of these Disney, like he's a wisecracker, and it's like one of the great things about his introduction to the movie is that he kind of he seems very invested in the Oscar Isaac version, and when he makes that crack at Kylo Ren, I mean, he's obviously stressed out. He thinks, this is it, I'm gonna die anyway, so I might as well just make a joke and get a laugh out of it. Yeah, I mean, people don't realize that that's kind of why he's joking, because he knows he's gonna die.
Right.
It's
like all he has is a defense in that situation.
He's just cutting old dudes in half, and he knows that guy.
Right.
What is some guy that he doesn't even know who Poe Dameron is at this point? And then, but they use that idea that he basically constantly makes these wisecracks. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, I don't think that's why he made those wisecracks in the thing. It's like, I don't know. It's just, it's an inaccurate, for lack of a better term, in my opinion, it's an inaccurate portrayal about at least what kind of how Oscar Isaac kind of has him set up.
Yeah, and you know, maybe to be fair to them, they only had one movie, and honestly, not a ton of screen time,
right,
to go on in understanding like who this character is and how he would act in different situations and everything. But still, yeah, I mean, I will say, like I said, I think we have slightly diverging views of at least this issue. You know, I wasn't a huge fan of the first three issues. This one I at least thought was better. I mean, I also thought the dialogue wasn't great. You know, like at one point, Poe says to Snap Wexley, "Don't worry, Snap, it'll be a snap."
Yeah.
Which is like, if you're going to make that joke, don't like say like, "Oh, don't worry, Wexley, it'll be a snap." Like, that's such a better way of doing that joke. If that even is a joke, I don't know what you call that, but you know, I think Jess could turn into be an interesting character, and maybe her tech who like wants to be a pilot, like maybe, but it's not their, again, it's not their comic. It's the Poe Dameron comic. Why are we spending all this time on these people? But having said that, you know, I was kind of able, at least in this issue, I kind of glossed over, either because my expectations had been pretty low from the first three issues, or I'm adjusting, or, you know, but, you know, like I said, I really like this idea of this high gravity prison planet. Gracchus the Hutt himself coming back, it was like, yeah, okay, this could be any Hutt, so let's make it Gracchus, whatever. You know, and, you know, I like this story. I think I like where it's headed, but, you know, that was enough for me this issue to go like, okay, I think maybe this one is headed in the right direction. Or, you know, turning around a little bit from what I didn't really like about the first three issues. So I think our specific thoughts, I don't think are that different, but I guess I kind of viewed it in either more positive light, or just, yeah, that stuff, I didn't let it bother me as much this time around.
Yeah, I don't know why. I don't know. Maybe I've just kind of I've lost.
Not that, but again, I agree with you on a lot of this stuff. You know, the dialogue isn't great, and yeah, like what I've said, this is a Poe Dameron comic. I want more Poe Dameron in it.
Yeah.
So hopefully we get more of that in the issues to come.
Yes. Well, I think it's probably time for us to wrap up. I mean, geez.
Yeah, I think that's
as far as my, what is it? My umbrage this week. This is a perfect 50th episode to Talking Birdcast.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to put this out here. I have in my hand, and it hasn't been very successful, so I'm going to make it real easy. Mm-hmm. We have an email address. It's hosts. Mm-hmm. So it's host with an S at it, at talkingbirdcast amazon.com. If you send me an
Mhm.
email saying, all you have to say is, I want that comic, I will mail you. This is U.S. only. I'm sorry, I can't do international. This is U.S. mailboxes. I will send you Han Solo #2.
That's a
Physical
good comic.
copy, backing board. It's in plastic. It was read by me, so it's got that cachet. I will mail it to you. You don't have to play a contest. You don't have to write an iTunes review. You don't have to do anything. You just have to send. It's first come, first serve. So I'm sorry if I get 2 emails and I have to make a choice, but it'll just be first come, first serve, and I'll send that to you, and you can have it to read or to use as kindling. I don't know. It's your business. It'll be your comic book. Be given in the spirit of a gift. It becomes yours, and you do whatever you want.
Yeah.
If you want to help us out, if you're like, hey, Robert's crazy, and I like that, his crazy opinions, I want to keep that. One of the ways you can help is and honestly, you can keep John kind of metering out the opinions and being like, hey, Robert's crazy. I like that John keeps Robert from being that crazy by introducing some perspective. Sorry, it depends on the subject. I guess I feel like I pontificated a little too much this week, but I'm very interested in keeping things real, so I'm not going to edit it all out. My point is, you can go to talkingbirdcast.com, and we have links to all of our social media. If you're like, I hate websites, I only go to amazon.com. That's the only website I like. We got that for you too. You can go talkingbirdcast.com/Amazon. Click on that as you go to Amazon, as we mentioned earlier in this episode. Then you buy your things, and then we get a little kickback, and it helps the cost of keeping this show up. Since
does not add to the cost of your purchase.
Yes, because let me see, hosting fees for a couple of loquacious, verbose Star Wars guys. It's
it's not nothing.
It's not nothing. But I would say on a personal level, the idea that people come and listen to this weekly, because I know people still download it. We do get stats. I do see that it actually does get downloaded. That's very humbling to me. I think it's almost embarrassing, but I appreciate it. What? I just think it's like, oh my God, it's out there. Me talking about Star Wars.
Yeah.
On a personal level, I want to thank you guys. This 50 episodes, I honestly thought we'd probably do this for a month or two and maybe get bored, but we've been doing it for over a year now, and sometimes with not a lot of feedback, but I appreciate that people are busy, and it's like, maybe I don't want to argue Star Wars with that guy. He's crazy. But I want to thank you, and I don't know if you have anything you want to say, John, or...
No, just thanks for listening. We appreciate it, and we'll be back next week with talking about the Rogue One trailer, which I am actually pretty excited about now.
I'm pretty excited. I'll probably be tweeting I'll probably be using our Twitter if I can get up.
Yeah, at Talking Birdcast.
Yes.
I probably will as well.
With our, maybe hot takes of things that we see, but the cooler takes will be on the show next week.
Yeah.
And again, thanks for listening, and for Talking Birdcast, I have been Robert Zachary.
And I am still John Llewellyn.
May the Force be with you.